I'm just forwarding the invitation to Alan Stedgy.
Yeah, no problem. As people log in, as more people join, I'll let them in. But to those that have attended, good evening. Thank you for joining this evening. And welcome to another of our networking events with Mr. Rob Sherman. Rob, as you know, was the former technical director of the FFA. And I think we'll be having a very interesting conversation this evening. We're running this in conjunction with Football Coaches Australia, and I'm very happy to have Glenn Worry, the CEO of FCA, here tonight, as well as members of the executive of FCA as well, and Gary Cole. And the way we're going to do this is the way we've worked every other forum. I'll ask Rob a couple of different questions. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them down in the chat. As the questions come in, I will then stop talking and we can get you guys to answer the questions as we go along, okay? So the more questions we have, the less you hear a Scottish accent, unless you talk to the multitude of Scots that are on the call, like Gavin or Mark, or a few other people like that as well. So Rob, thank you very much for joining us this evening, mate. As I said, I know we've had a quick chat prior to this, and I know you think that people will be disappointed. I personally don't think so. I think this is going to be one of the most enlightening conversations that we're going to have over the course of the COVID-19 virus shutdown. But just to kick off, and just before I let Alan Stadgick join the call, just to kick off, I do have to start with, I suppose, one of the most obvious questions that you would likely be asked, and that is that your tenure at the FFA was short for whatever reason, and we'll get into that. What made you take the job in the first place, and what was the key reasoning behind you deciding to leave after such a short space of time?
Well, the initial reason for taking the role was I actually thought I could make a difference. I had some doubts, if I'll be candid about that, at the outset. I'd worked at FFA before and had seen, I think, the start of a change in attitude during the last days of Hans' tenure. But I had a number of conversations, spoke with a number of board members, and sort of thought I might have the opportunity to make a change. And that's why I took the role. I think that the reason I left, just to sort of take out the second part, was I just found the 10 months hugely frustrating. Obviously, David was still in the role, but very much sort of not in the role as well at that time. And that's no criticism of him, that's just a fact. And the constant feedback was, we'll wait for the new CEO. And I'll be honest and talk about, when you're talking about football decisions, I never really understood that. And I made that clear that I think we could have ploughed on with football discussions and decisions regardless of who the CEO was. And I have an opinion on, the roles of technical people, etc. And then also, I found it just the hugely siloed approach across the game. So FFA and their relationship with the federations, there's a lot of discussions go on, but they're not cohesive or collective. There's the discussions been going around the New Leagues Working Group, second tier, MPL review, all independently held, no collective discussion around the competition structure. And then within FFA, it's a hugely siloed organization. So you have a technical department that doesn't talk to the community department, that doesn't talk to the international department, and vice versa. And then within that, media marketing don't really talk to anyone, and et cetera, et cetera. So just this hugely frustrating circumstance, of which, given the separation, the unbundling and different things, I honestly couldn't see changing. So I decided that it was time for me to leave, albeit a short tenure.
So over the course of the last few months, and I don't want you talking about individuals particularly, Rob, because I don't think it's a pertinent thing to do, but there has been publicly stated conversations where the FFA CEO has stated that he felt you left the role too soon. What do you say to that?
I think that's quite hard to judge in terms of the COVID situation, but I'll be honest and say I don't regret leaving. Just from a distance, it seems business as usual, if I'm honest, across the whole game. I'm not hearing anything that's radical enough for me to go, oh, you know, that's a step in the right direction. I think what's appearing is the same mentality.
Okay. After you left, you wrote a 7-page dossier article review, and it was identified, you know, your feelings and what you would like to have changed in the game. You spoke in depth, particularly about the governance aspect of it, and that you feel that those people who ignore the game in some ways are not being introduced, or they're not being listened to, in essence, and maybe being ignored. Do you feel there's too many pen pushers in the game and not enough doers?
Well, I mean, whether it's too many, I just look at it and you look at the finances of the game and the like, and ultimately, in my opinion, we're inefficient, very inefficient. And therefore, do you need something replicated 10 times? I don't think you do. I think a centralized approach would be much more efficient. There are ways, I'm sure, of making sure that there's democracy and everyone's represented, and that there's a voice for each state, but equally so, to make or get some kind of direction just takes forever. And I said it's inefficient. That's not to say that the business side of the game and the football side of the game shouldn't work closely together. Of course they should. But the football should be the directing factor. And that is supported by the business, in my opinion.
Okay. So on the flip side, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that we've put down. What do you think's right with the game at the moment here in this country?
Well, first of all, you have a history, and it's a long one. The game's been hugely popular for a long time. I played out here in the early 80s, and the game was already, I think, the highest junior participation sport in those days. There's a lot of participants. Obviously, there's only there's 540 odd or 80 odd thousand registered participants, but they're citing 2 million participants. So that means there's 1.5 million people who play the game in some form or other, but they're not within the game, if you see what I mean. But so that's a plus. There's a good spread of clubs. There's competitions across every league, competitions at every level, but it could be a lot better. That's a simple fact.
Okay. My day job, I work as a strategy director. Do you believe that football in this country should have a national strategy that covers the whole game, from grassroots to professional?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely 100%. I actually have written one. I wrote one, and getting any traction on that was, yeah.
So was that presented to your bosses at the FFA?
Yeah, I shared that right from the very beginning, and probably rewrote it 5 or 6 times. Shared it on my departure, but then you get things extrapolated out of it. So things like the priority would be the transfer scheme or women's and girls football. Now they're vitally important, all of them, but they're not the big picture. You need to get the big picture sorted, of which those are elements of the big picture. They're not the big picture, and there's other things beside. So I'm sure you'll see coming out post-COVID some headlines which will be about elements of a strategy, but not the whole strategy.
Right. Okay. Do you think? I mean, we were speaking earlier, just before the others joined, and we were talking about Andy Roxburgh and Craig Brown and what they'd done for the Scottish game in the mid to late 90s. And later, I think it was just before then, Ernie Walker, who was the chairman of the SFA, was tasked with developing a think tank for Scottish football. Do you think there should be a think tank for Australian football? And if so, do you think that the recent communication with people like Mark Viduka and what have you coming on to try and discuss about what the game is, do you think that's the start of it, or do you think that's too little too late?
Well, I did sort of ask both the national body to put together a technical group, and also the A-League suggested that they needed a technical group, which was, gave the technical side of the game. I think the starting 11 is a good initiative, particularly if it's a sounding board. So, for me, the people who are at the sharp end need to be in the think tank. People who are current and working in the game now need to be the drivers of the game. And then something like the starting 11 is a good sounding board to get feedback from. And you could filter that down across the whole country. You could have state think tanks, if you like, where you could test these things. So it's not just someone coming along and saying, we're going left. There's a proposal, it's discussed and then refined. And then through the course of collective wisdom, you end up with the right structure. So it's definitely a step in the right direction, but I think there's more to do. So,
okay. We got Glenn Worry on the call and Gary Cole on the call as well, both of whom are, the CEO and committee members of Football Coaches Australia. And obviously, we've got a lot of coaches on the call as well. We're fortunate to have Kevin Muscat on the call as well. Where do you see the current coach education system in Australia, and how do you think it should move forward?
Well, I've got a biased opinion because I wrote the thing, so it's probably asking the wrong person there. But I think the model's sound. I think that up through C and B, so, you're moving from the copy culture to the create. And the big thing for me is that you give people a model. That's not to say what you coach and how you do it, but a model to follow, which can be adapted. And that was the whole concept when we wrote it, was the coach expertise model. So, if you look at the model in its graphic, you've got a vision, knowledge at the bottom, vision, philosophy at the top, 3 pillars of competency in management, match and training. That's what a competent coach is capable of doing. But you have your own way as a coach, and that's totally legitimate. It seems perhaps that currently there's a perception that there's a way and you have to follow that way. And that's probably, or that isn't what was intended. And I know, John came on an A, Kev's been through some of the system. Hopefully that wasn't the message we gave at the time. It was a model that you followed and then you could adapt or dismiss it. And I just think that perhaps if there's anything, the model gives you a guideline. It's a roadmap. That's all it is. It's not the definitive roadmap.
In terms of the coaching, though, and I know this, as I say, I'm very honoured to have Kevin Muscat on the call, and I know that Kevin he's recently moved to Europe, and the coaching licenses here weren't recognised in Europe. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a number of reasons, really. But first of all, none of the Asian courses are recognised. So it's not unique to Australia. But things have changed in Europe. So when I was technical director of the FFA, we were able to make our own decision on what we accepted. That seems to have changed under Europe, under the convention. So there's obviously a little bit of a change in that. Kevin might elaborate later on if he has the opportunity on his experience with that. But ultimately Europe has become a little bit more closed, and that is the problem because their convention spreads across the 52 member countries and not beyond anywhere. And it's a challenge FIFA are looking at, but in some confederations, the courses are awarded because of who your uncle is. And
how do you think
that's the danger? That's where you can't have a blanket approach.
So how can Footballer Coaches Australia help? How can they help coaches from all levels you know, to recognise what it is that they need to do here as a coach of football in this country?
I think the biggest gap, and it was a gap that you know, I highlighted back in about 2012, was that the assumption again of the administrators is that you come on a course and you're done. Great stuff. Thanks, we've had your money, off you go. It's the actual backup that's needed. It's the follow-up, the informal coach education. Now, you know, again, if you build the game structure right and you have, you know, higher clubs, then in each club, say there's 4 evenings of learning going on that are mandatory within a criteria, then actually you can actually develop a whole framework of informal learning within the game, just sits there. And that's where the Coaches Association can add great value, because all their members have a great depth of knowledge and can share that across that framework. So it's the informal learning that's sadly missing. And that's why there's a need for a TD course, I feel, is that, you know, someone within the club who actually can help develop the coaches. I'm sure some do, but some TDs, you know, probably don't. So there's a great role for that. I mean, probably one of the best models is a guy called Teddy Moen in Norway. Teddy's got a great setup, does overseas travel, supports from a legality side, from that side, as well as the education side.
Okay. I've got a couple more questions, and then I'm going to hand over to the audience. I've got questions at the minute from Gary Cole and from the Voice of Football, Simon Hill, who I should add is going to be my guest next week. So it's maybe a little bit of an opportunity for Simon to see how things work. You just mentioned there about a TD course. And I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Who do you think should replace you as the FFA TD?
I can't answer that. I think the preference would be someone from within Australia, personally.
Right, okay.
I think the last thing you need now is someone coming in with a whole band of new ideas. I think someone from within the game would be best, but who that is, I don't know. You don't know,
okay. And as I say, I knew it was a bit of a sort of leading question, but the fact that you said it's someone within Australia, I don't disagree. I think it has to be someone that knows the game in this country, that can actually take the game forward, and that potentially can work with who I think James Johnson has got a good idea on what he's going to do. Whether or not, you know, he's got the I suppose the backing and the kudos to do it, that's another story. But what I want to do is I'm going to let Gary Cole. So Gary, I know you fired a question to me, sir. Just let me take you off mute. You're off mute. If you want to fire away to Rob, and then Simon, and then I'll go to Glenn Warry just after that as well. So Gary, on you go, mate.
Cheers, James. G'day, Rob. Thanks for joining us tonight. Much appreciated, mate. Really, this is the question is based on my current knowledge and observation. I've been doing a fair bit of reading during this time around the current coach education system and having lots of conversations. And from the dinosaur sat here that hasn't coached practically for a long time, it seems that things that were important to me when I was learning how to coach, which were the principles of play, seem to have got lost or been forgotten. And all the conversation seems to be around systems of play. Firstly, do you think they're fair observations? And secondly, are the principles of play still relevant today? And how do we get them back into the system if they are?
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously, if you talk about penetration, width, you know, depth, etc., then they still apply, obviously. The degree of which they apply. So, you know, we'll talk maybe about you know, pressing the ball support and zonal marking. Well, you know, that's not the only way to defend. So, you know, we have to be mindful of that. I definitely think that the way we went in terms of parking a little bit of football knowledge and working around more of the process retrospectively was a bit of a mistake. So I think covering a little bit more of the detail around the knowledge would be more beneficial. So actually going into a bit of detail around the key technical points, etc., etc. Now that could be distance learning, quite easily done as a distance learning task. You know, mandatory videos, etc., and not necessarily covered on course. And I think there is a gap there without any shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, mate. Cheers.
Sorry. Simon Hill, up to you, sir.
Thanks, James. Good to see you, Rob. Yakida. I have a question which is sort of quite pertinent with what's happened over the last 24, 48 hours. With the collapse of the Barcelona Academy in Australia, a lot of talk about private academies for kids. There seems to be an awful lot of them, some allied to clubs in Europe or elsewhere. I remember Hamburger a few years ago saying that his plan was to try and regulate all these private academies, sort of bring them into the FFA tent via a licensing system. My question is, was that done to your knowledge? If not, is it planned to be done? Can it be done? And do you think it would be a good thing to do, given that parents seem to spend thousands of dollars on these academies and nobody seems to know whether they're any good or not?
A couple of things, really. So, no, it wasn't done. Hasn't been regulated. Secondly, the question I think you've got to ask is, why do they exist? And the reality is that if there was a proper accredited academy scheme that was managed properly within the club framework, then perhaps they wouldn't be in business. For me, you know, this is something we worked on and it's sitting on the table waiting to go. There is a new accredited scheme for academies. We were hoping to make it mandatory with the A-League and any future pro league, and an opt-in for clubs where the clubs are categorized. In that way, in my opinion, you get a benchmark. Parents know what they're paying for. There's some kind of, there's transparency about how operations, finance and the like. And then you have a realistic chance of coming through your club and through the game, rather than being a business which sits outside the game. And the reason they exist, in my opinion, is plain and simple, is that the club scene isn't audited. Although there's MPL, the standard's different in every state. And by the way, the feedback is that an awful lot of clubs, the vast majority of clubs, don't meet the requirements.
So it's that sort of silo system that you're talking about, everything operating independently.
Yeah, instead of having one standardized approach that is applied. Now, you wouldn't necessarily link it to all the competition structures, because that then forces issues around, you know, political issues. If it was an opt-in, then people can judge for yourselves. If clubs choose not to opt in, I think that's a message in itself about their true intent.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, the Barcelona Academy is only one. The AC Milan Academy stopped working in New South Wales, I think, about 6 months ago as well. And that was something that was predominantly a money-making exercise. I actually know someone that was at the Barcelona Academy, and this kid was going around telling his teammates and that he was at La Masia and he was playing with Barcelona, and he's now, you know, he wasn't allowed to play school football because his contract with Barcelona prevented him from doing it. So the messages that these guys are sending to these kids and these parents is nonsensical. And the level of coaching that they're getting, Barcelona actually advertised, the Barcelona Academy actually advertised for coaches over here to go and work with them. And they would be trained the Barcelona way. Didn't amount to a hill of beans, to be perfectly honest with you.
In my time in New Zealand football, we were approached by a major Italian club with the view that they'd set up a whole load of academies across the country. But when you looked into it, you know, they were going to use local coaches anyway, and all the money would predominantly be flowing out the game. Whereas clubs do it properly, the income they receive, if it's should be invested back in the player, then the player's investing in themselves, you know, and then the money stays in the game.
So do you think the SAP system should be seen as an academy structure?
The SAP?
Yeah.
No.
No.
No. SAP is a phase of development, not an academy for 9 to 12-year-olds.
Right. Okay. And you think
So
that
I'm dead against it. It's every club should have SAP.
yeah, every club, every NPL club, or every club full stop?
Every club should be aspiring to provide an SAP program for all its players because it's a phase of development.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so Mr. Cosmina, you've asked a question, sir.
Am I on mute?
No,
Am I
you're
live?
You're off, John. I can hear you.
Yeah, Rob, I just put a little thing up on the chat. I mean, I think the Barcelonas, and I know Arsenal apparently opened up on the Sunshine Coast here about a couple of years ago. I don't know if they still exist, but they're big clubs in the world. They've got big names that everybody knows about, including all of our opposition, like AFL and Rugby League and all that sort of stuff. You know, when you get rugby league coaches might go to Britain, for example, they want to go to Manchester United or Man City to find out how they do things. So they've probably got something to offer the game in terms of profile, but what about charging them a levy to actually operate in Australia? Because basically they're just franchises. You've got some schmuck somewhere else that's gone and spent a few bucks to buy, say, the Barcelona name, for example. He's opened up here. And they were doing quite well for a while because I live in Brisbane and one of the ones that fell over was here. And they had a lot of kids. But their head office is offshore. So maybe if you charge them a levy, they could still operate, but something comes back to the game locally.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ways of skinning the cat. Ultimately, they're probably going to be there. It's about how do you make sure that that money flows back into the game. But, equally so, if you're going to regulate them, that's an expensive business. And so I think you'd be better off personally regulating the clubs who want to, and actually putting a benchmark against your own youth development. But if they're going to exist, why not just levy them and make sure you can take a cut of the pie? I don't see the problem. But, do we really think that they're not real academies, are they? They're top-up programs. Yeah, they're top-up programs. That's what they are. And they're selling a dream. And, again, the parents fully realise they actually can't go abroad till you're 18 unless the parents move for non-footballing reasons.
But one of the things I've found is like a lot of the kids that actually that 1.5 million that you talked about that don't really exist in the registration, a lot of the parents involved of those kids they never grew up with football. They grew up in rugby league or Aussie rules or something else, some other sport. They may have had a loose association with the game, but they don't really, it's not in their blood. But their kids have got involved because the game in the last 20 years has just expanded massively. So you get a kid wants to go to a Barcelona academy or he wants to go to a Brisbane City academy. What's he going to look at? And the Barcelona academy sell the dream. Brisbane City, what are they going to say? You might play NPL. That's what you get. There's a lot of parents get bluffed.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's the reality. So fair enough. Let them waste their money, and as you said, take a cream off it, take a percentage out of it.
Fair enough.
I'm open to that. The issue is I personally feel the time invested should be invested in the clubs that are here, because the evidence suggests, across the whole world that if players actually play, 90 odd senior games, especially at a lower pro level, they migrate to a better, and they move overseas, they'll make it to a better level. How many kids have ever gone offshore and done well? It's perhaps we need to educate the parents. That ain't me. So,
Sorry, guys.
But this is a good debate. This is the type of thing that needs to happen, John.
Can I just go back to Coley's question?
Yep.
You hear me, guys? Just about your thing about principles of play. I agree with you 100%. It is more about systems now, but I think the way we're teaching kids, we're not actually, I see a lot of kids that don't have the basic fundamental skills. Like they don't get their body in the right position to receive a ball. They don't look at, I've been doing a lot of one-on-one stuff with the school that I coach at, and these kids are decent. They're like youth NPL players. They're here in Brisbane and quite successful. Some have been on the fringe, have been picked in the Raw Academy. They're all good kids, but they don't have like basic core skills that I know Coley had when he was 16, because he scored a hat-trick against South Australia in that final at, was it 1972, mate? At the old Sydney Sports Ground. But those sorts of skills, I don't see those in kids anymore. They're more happy, with a dribble and a step over, and they want to play stuff behind their front foot. They don't get their body in the right position to receive. Nothing's simple anymore. It's all complicated. They don't have the basic core skills to be able to actually execute the principles of the game.
Well, I have to be a bit careful because I'm not coaching like you on a day-to-day basis. But in talking about it, that seems to be the feedback. And I guess that was part of my question to Rob around about systems. Because if the principles of play have gone out of the coach, let me preface this by saying I'm a horribly logical so-and-so. So if the principles of play were important, and they are the foundations of what the game are, and I get that the game changes and flows, but if they are the foundation and we're not training the coaches to know and understand them, how do we get that information onto the kids? And
Sorry, Guy, I think there's
go ahead, mate. That's what it's all about.
So again, the proposal has been, and this is one of the disappointments of the shutdown, that if you look at the age-related training, so let's take junior is, up to 12, youth is up to 18, and then senior, then the courses need to be more bespoke to the age group than they currently are. So we have a youth C, which has a skill acquisition bit, but that's all. There's no B. So the whole idea was that we actually expand a C license for junior football, which is all about skill acquisition and what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The basic principles of play, someone far, left, right, middle, behind, and then the good technique, able to progress the ball, etc., etc. Then in youth football, you're introducing them to the game training aspect and more of a team orientation with some kind of tactical element, but those are still component then obviously of senior football. Now, the opportunity in the last 8 weeks is those courses could have been written, but of course everyone was stood down.
Yeah.
And this is one of the challenges you have. The workforce is so stretched that actually putting things together, maintaining the current and then actually developing the future is almost impossible because people are so stretched.
Guys, can I just jump in there? James, is it all right if I have a word? Am I muted?
What's it all about, mate?
So the majority of you guys will know that I was probably one of the pioneers, I guess, in terms of starting up a football academy in Australia. And the reason I'd done that is because I didn't believe that what was on offer for my son was good enough. And I mean that in the most respectful way possible in terms that, I coached him. So I coached him from the very beginning, 5 years old, Pagewood FC, and coached him all the way through till he was 12 years old. And then he obviously come to the United Kingdom. But through my academy, there's a place for academies, and I totally hear what everyone's saying. You included, Rob, about these clubs that are starting up academies, and most of them are bullshit. Let's not beat around the bush. But what you're looking at is you're looking at ex-footballers that want to be involved in the game. Now, the only way that these coaches, ex-footballers, can be involved in the game was through someone like me. So I had 5 full-time staff. I had Brian Baker, Steve Marsden, Lloyd Owusu, Neil Jablonski, and my old man, a former Socceroo, and myself. So that's 6 full-time staff. So yes, we charged the kids $2,500 per season, which people turned their noses up at. We had 60 kids in the academy. We had 40-week program. This was 3 nights a week training. The training sessions were well over 2 hours a time, and the kids would play 2 to 3 games a week. So if you look at it on a whole, what they were getting with my academy was a hell of a lot more than what they would get if they went to a club. Yes, I held them all back from a club. And yes, I copped a lot of grief from Football New South Wales for it, and to a certain extent, the FFA. But the coaching staff that I had, you had to be very good to coach at my academy. And if you weren't, you didn't coach. So if you look at it now, the ones that come through the academy, Ryan Teague, my son, Presley Ortiz that just went overseas, and there's another 10 to 15 players that are still playing NPL 1 or A-League youth. So that's the byproduct of what was happening through the academy. Now, until Football New South Wales, until the Australian FA get some sort of plan together with the clubs. I mean, I was a technical director at Harcoa. So what I done there was I took my model from the academy of Mr. Soccer and I put it into Harcoa. And I'd like to think by the end of the time that I was there in the 5 years that I served for the football club, things were starting to come to fruition because I was bringing in the right coaching staff. I told the club, I said, you've got to pay these coaching staff because if you don't pay them well and you pay them what the rest of the clubs are paying them, they'll just go out to a private academy and pick up money. But coaching for a private academy is not enjoyable unless the philosophy's there and unless you're doing the right stuff. Now, a lot of these academies aren't doing the right stuff. Therefore, people just go and coach there for the money. So I would suggest FFA need to have words with the NPL clubs and get on board the right coaching staff and make it mandatory that the right coaching staff are on board and obviously paying them in the right respects. Until to such times as that happens, it's going to be the same old coaches, no disrespect, guys that probably don't know the game. So what comes out of that, players will jump from club to club. You might jump from St. George to Harcoa to Sydney Olympic to Sydney United, chasing the dream and chasing the right philosophy and the right coach. And until such times as that's changing, then you may just be lucky that you'll land on the right coach, and you may just be lucky that you'll fly the nest and go abroad and play as a professional.
So in response to that, Mark, the academy panel that are set up have written the criteria on 4 levels, okay, from 1 to 4. In essence, 1 being very low, 4 being on a par with the EPPP category 1. And if you look at maybe 2 or 3 clubs in the country, probably reach the category 2, which is full-time staff, non-user pay. So at the minute, Victory are non-user pay. Okay, so the kids don't pay. So the club are putting in a big chunk of money, staff are all full-time. So that's the model you're talking about. Now, the reality is, once you get 2 or 3 with the bar high, then people will be able to see the wheat from the chaff. Because when we're talking of academies, at the minute, everyone's got an academy. It's the most abused word in the Australian vernacular.
Yeah, I agree.
And so you're dead right. What you need is standards and accountability.
Definitely, Rob. And until such times as the FFA put something in place, and as you said, I know it's a difficult job, mate, is to have that level stream with the NPL clubs. That's going to be very, very hard because any Tom, Dick and Harry can start up an academy. I had such conversations with Football New South Wales when I had my academy that I had to go and get legal advice because obviously there's a restriction of trade for them to turn around and say that you can't go. All they can do is badmouth academies and say, don't go there. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, parents will pick what they want to do. If my son needed golf lessons, I'd send him to an ex-pro. No disrespect. I'd have a look at who the coach is. Did he play the game? And I'd send him to him. If he needed piano lessons, I'd send him out for piano lessons. But it wouldn't be to a muppet like most of these people are sending their kids to.
Couldn't you, I mean, if you look at the game, and I did write this the other week, is if you build the competition structure, ultimately, if you wind the clock back to 1853 or whatever it was, the reason associations were set up, clubs wanted to compete. So if you use the competition structure and you base criteria around it and you adhere to the criteria, because it's not adhered to, that's a fact, you could actually filter the game and the game would self-select. And you'd have clubs in your top division who'd have to do certain things. In the next division, have to do certain things. You have to perform and you have to do certain things. Otherwise, you can't be there. You could sort the game out through the competition structure comfortably. It would take time. It's not an easy fix. This might be a 20, 30, 34 sort of scenario, but it could be done. Then all the arguments fade away because you build it around the game. But that discussion doesn't even happen because it's all about today. It's all about the buck in the bank today.
Just on that point, Rob, Alan, we've got a question from Alan Stajic. Alan, do you want to, I think it's very pertinent, the question that you've got to ask me. Do you want to fire away and ask and sort of make the statement as well?
Yep. Hi, Rob. How you going? And everyone.
Hey, Al, how are you, mate?
I'm good. I'm good. You're almost just touching on it then, but obviously everything we do in talent development takes, 7 to 10 years to get a result. So looking back, to 2005, 2010, Blind Freddie could say that we haven't done a good job in our pathways with the result and, levels of players that are now playing in Europe or the high level Socceroos we've got, because we don't have what we had in the late 80s, 90s and 2000s in terms of quantity of quality. If you had to pick, you've been around our scene for a long time. If you had to pick one or two things that you could change, forget about money and administration and governance, what do you think is the most important aspect that we have to change to hopefully in 7 to 10 years time, we're still not having the same conversation?
There'd be two probably, mate. One would be that any club could reach the top tier.
I agree.
That's the first one. Then you said aspiration. You link aspiration to certain criteria, then it all grows. So the criteria would include youth development is a must, an absolute must, not optional. And those two things. So in time, we could have a conversation today, set up a club in Division 6, and in 10 years' time could be in the top tier. You'd know what you had to do. Salford United or whatever, Salford City.
In the UK.
That would be it for me.
Cool. Cool. Look, we're still getting people joining the call, believe it or not. So that's fantastic. I'll ask another question just now. Rob, we've heard since the COVID outbreak, it's sort of changing tact a little bit. Since the COVID outbreak, we've heard a lot of people coming on telling us everything that's wrong with the game in this country. We've had managers, players to TV personalities having 15-minute rants on what they need to do to change the game. I suppose you've touched on it a little bit, but what do you think needs to change to make the game better?
Well, I think that my last comment is the fundamental that the aspiration to be able for clubs to be able to reach the top is, in a closed league, what's the motivation for any club to invest and to grow? Mark's put a question on there about regulation. Well, yeah, that's where you set up a parallel body. So if you've got a professional organization that actually audits that and regulates that, that's part of the role of the federations, is to actually regulate that and clubs in their area. And again, no favor. It can't be worked on looking after your mate. It's got to be done so it's completely uniform across the country. Not easy. The second one would be, I would like to see a more flexible approach in the junior space, because I think that we're a bit rigid. So smaller sided games, intra-club competition, more gala days, just more gameplay. So actually, instead of training 3 times a week, play 3 times a week. 5-a-side games, quick turnover. I'm sure looking at some of the faces here, you never got coached. You played. That's what you did. You played a lot of football. And in essence, that's probably the missing piece, is how often outside of the formal environment are kids playing? And could we recreate that in the club environment where you just have 3 nights a week where it's 5-a-side nights? You turn up, mixed age groups, play games, go home.
Mark, you're off mute. Do you want a response to that?
It was kind of on the last point that Rob had made, just in terms of distribution of finances. I agree with your point of aspiration and being able to kind of get promoted. I think that's the essence of the game. my experience, I was head of coaching at Sunderland, and we had a budget of 4 million for the academy, which seems a lot of money, but in Premiership terms, it was nothing. And the head of the academy spoke to me and said, if the first team manager came to me and asked me to justify it, or asked me for 4 million for a player, I couldn't do it, because the 4 million for a player would be better for the club. So how would you be able to regulate the fact that maybe first team, A-League teams or NPL teams, a vast majority of the money just gets sucked out into that area? And how would you be able to keep it so that it's getting invested in the youth?
Well, first of all, I think if you take the money off the kid, then you can actually look at the books and do an audited account and make sure the right amount is spent back into youth development. Because in some cases it most definitely is, but we'll know cases where it most definitely isn't. But there's a lot of clubs that actually, in fairness, actually invest more than they take off the kids, to be fair. The other thing you'd say is in the A-League, you know, there are a couple of clubs that actually are putting a lot of money in and not charging the kids, and that comes into a transfer system. You've got to protect those clubs so the kid can't just walk out the door. But equally so, how has Australia really capitalised on its potential as being a transfer market, both internally and overseas? No, it hasn't. In the professional game, you have two assets generally. That's your stadium, which no one has in Australia, and your players. So the one thing you can capitalise on here is your players, by developing them and bringing them through and selling them. And that, for me, would be the model for any club here, is instead of just spending money out to win a league and play in AFC Champions League, is actually invest in your own sustainability by developing future players. And that's a cost. So, you know, again, the distribution, the salary cap should all be looked at. But what happens if you don't get any distribution? What happens if it's minimal? Then you ain't having foreign players coming in. So, you know, it's cheaper if you develop your own. It certainly is.
Do you think that you know, each club has got a marquee player in the A-League? Do you think that marquee players is something that should be stopped to allow for development through the academies into first grade, into first teams?
I would just say that you know, again, I'd look at the salary cap if I was honest and say whether that goes, or perhaps everyone under 23 is outside of the cap. You can have as many players as you like outside of the cap. I think the minimum wage is restrictive. So, or the wage that you have to invest in young players is restrictive. Actually, market forces tell you what you're worth. And for any of us who played in the UK, and certainly in my day, you know, you sold your soul for that. But, you know, the choices that managers have to make around retaining 3 20-year-olds at X amount lead to short-term decisions. So there's a whole load of regulatory things that need to be looked at. If clubs genuinely want to spend on marquee players and bring them in, that's up to them. I would limit the number. I think, you know, 4 is enough. Certainly no more than 5 currently. I just think that, you know, if we look at it honestly, players 4 and 5 are generally sitting on the bench and not starting. So that's a waste of money.
There's a lot of agreement on your point about people wanting, you know, coming up through the playing football on the streets. You know, we've got Rocky make a comment saying that, you know, kids want more playground environments. We've got Causey, who the red wine has finally got to his spell check on his things, and we've got Gary as well, and we've also got Terry saying that the first coach he had was in Germany and he was 26. You know, so there's a lot of agreement on that. Rocky, Causey, Gary, have you anything that you want to sort of add on any of those points that you've just made?
Yeah, sorry.
You go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the majority of kids registered in the game, they don't play high-level football. A lot of them play, especially in this country, because the mate plays. You know, they start school at a young age and they make friends. So a lot of kids just play football because they just enjoy it. Mates play it, and the small minority play at a higher level. So kids just want to play the game. And if you give them, like from my experience, you give them too much informational kind of coaching, especially at a young age, they don't want it. They just want to play, get a lot of touches. And I agree, our formats are a lot better now, but they can be better. You know, even if we look at Belgium and what they're doing, you know, they were really radical with their changes. I think Australia needs to be radical. You know, slow steps. I think we're just way too behind. But yeah, street football. It's kids love it. They enjoy it, and you know just got to drive that passion. And then when they're teenagers, if they want to get serious, then you know you can give them more tailored coaching and structured environments.
I've taken Kevin Muscat off mute. Obviously, you know, Kevin's over in Europe at the moment, and I'm sure he's seen things differently, the way that kids are playing football over there. Mr. Muscat, is there anything that you want to add to this comment?
Hi, James. Rob, how are you?
Hi, Kev. All right, mate?
Yeah, very well. It's difficult for me to answer, to be honest, James, because I've been here for a short period of time, and most of that's been stuck indoors, mate. So I haven't had the opportunity to see too much of what's happening at that level, apart from directly at the club I'm working at. And it just seems like, I mean, these. I don't know, you know, I'm listening, and it's great that you still see so much, you know, passion and belief by, you know, so many people. It's just, I've got to be careful, because I don't want to be seen to be running things down or speaking ill, you know, especially considering, you know, I've just moved away from Australia, and the competition and Australian football has given me so much. So I don't want to be, you know, I think it's well documented in recent, especially recent weeks. You know, everyone's queuing up. You can't.
Everyone's queuing up. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, you can't get in the queue quick enough to take pot shots. But you know, unfortunately, and I don't know the answers, so I haven't got the answers. So I don't want to be, you know, slinging anything here. But the reality is, it just seems that eventually what ends up happening, and it's great to see Coley and Rob and Cozzy, you know, you've been such a long time, and how the game hasn't managed to suck the energy out of you in Australia to give back is beyond me, and I commend you for your continual, and Simon as well, you've just come on some of the, you know, your continual want for the game to get better in Australia, but it just seems that you know, I certainly got to that point where it just sucked all the life and energy out of me, wanting to give something back to the game. The game just sucked that out of me, and you get to the point where, unfortunately, I felt that, you know, change couldn't be made, or I couldn't influence any change. Like I said, I'm coming here to listen and support Rob.
I appreciate
a lot of time for Rob.
I appreciate that, and I didn't mean to put you in a position.
No, that's fine.
Because if you did, I know that I could maybe revert it back and say, I know you spent quite a lot of time in Scotland, albeit on the wrong side of Glasgow, but you would have seen a lot of kids kicking a ball in the street. You know, when you're going about Govan, or when you're travelling down that road, everybody's out kicking a ball. It's all different, you know. And I think the mindset is different.
Without doubt, and I don't think it only discriminates to our code of football. I think society's changed from when I grew up. Yeah. So I don't think we can specifically say that we've categorically done something specifically wrong as a code. Yes, development. You know, we can sit here and have conversations for a lot longer than you know, this is going to be on for this evening. Yeah. But you know, society's changed so much that I don't think we've adapted to that. I think the biggest thing for me, if I could just, you know, speak about me rather than the game, I remember going to my local club, the club that my dad supported, and being there, you know, whether it was training or he was watching the first team train or whatever it was, you know, 4 or 5, you know, 6 days a week. Yeah. And whenever I was with him, you know, we were, whether I was training or whether I wasn't training, we were kicking a ball, and it was, training was less structured when I was a younger when I was playing compared to the youngsters these days. But there was all the unstructured stuff where he was having a beer or having a game of cards or watching the first team train that I was, just having a kick of the ball. So, all of a sudden, from training 3 nights a week for an hour, that the unstructured stuff, trebled that alone by just being in an environment where, I was around a football the whole time.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I really appreciate that. And just on all the things that we're talking about and all the relevant concerns or comments that we have, Simon, again, the voice of football, has made a very good comment. Simon, you're on again, mate.
Thanks, James. Rob, and anybody else who wants to contribute, really. I don't think it's any secret or shock to anyone that the game is in financial distress, not for the first time in its history in this country. There's a possibility, and I have no insights, so don't ask me, but there is a possibility that the value of the Fox Sports TV rights deal may drop, or wherever it goes in the near future. We've just lost Hyundai as major naming rights sponsors, worth $6 million a year. We're sitting around talking about what needs to be done. How on earth do we afford it? Who pays for it? That's the whole crux of the problem, isn't it? I'll be interested to know if you, Rob, or anybody else has any ideas how we're going to do all the things we want to do without the money.
Yes. Taking everyone off mute, because everyone, I think, should have a comment on that one if they're open. Everyone's off mute.
Yeah, just an interesting one on that. I'll just jump in on that. So the National Registration Fund or whatever. So FFA get on average $14. And basically they give $11 back to the
Just give me a
federation.
second, Rob. Just give me a second, mate.
You just took away.
Right, Rob, fire away, mate.
I was going to say, so you look at that and you go, well, there's a question for a start off. So actually, how much money comes into the game through registrations? I honestly don't know. I can never get to the bottom of it. But let's just say, the people talk about the cost of football, and that's the cost that's predominantly charged by the clubs. Let's just say that from an outset, you put the registration fee at $100, but you openly said, $10 goes to international, $10 international activity, $10 goes to coach ed, blah, blah, blah. Your competition costs you $25, and that's it. Then there's $54 million in the game every year for a start off. Now, if you could encompass another million players, that's 150 million players, 150 million a year before you even go to any sponsor. And I think the game should start from that point in the sense of, what can you rely on, and learn how to spend that wisely and most effectively first. Because I think it's spent inefficiently and very badly currently. Whatever that amount is, that's my personal opinion, that there's a better way to use the money that currently just sits in the game. Doesn't really answer the question, Simon, but in essence, the money that comes in regardless of any sponsorship, is it well used? I don't think it is.
Do we know the breakdown of where all that money goes, Rob? Every last dollar?
I don't think. I mean, I can't answer. I don't know, if I'm honest. But I found, apparently an association keeps some. They begrudgingly hand some to the federation, who begrudgingly hand it to FFA, who will give it back. And you sort of go, well, how it's accounted for? No idea. And the same with coach education. So, coach ed might make some money. It's predominantly largely cost recovery, but it might make money. That goes into general coffers. It doesn't get spent back in coach education. If it was, then I think people would go, okay, at least it's there for something else within the coaching education framework. I just think there's a whole load of smoke and mirrors that, I can't answer. And I don't want to throw aspersions because I simply don't know. But it's, where does it go? And is it inefficient because you got 10 tiers or 10 replicated bodies?
Simon,
thanks for.
Am I mute here, James?
Yeah.
Sorry, say again.
Simon, the easiest way for the FFA to do it is there's talking about these primary school programs. If you take and strip everything all the way back to a kid when they get into the age where they're allowed to play football. You can play rugby league at 4 years old, but you can't play football until you're 5. So my son played for Mascot Jets rugby league for a year until he was able to play for Pagewood Football Club. He joins Pagewood Football Club. He then goes to school at 6 years old or 5 years old into kindergarten. The FFA could, in theory, have control of the kids as soon as they touch primary school all the way through. And I hate to go back to it, but the most simple way that I generated money for my academy was send my coaching staff into schools through the day. So if we went into a school, 1,500 participants in a primary school, and we charged $3 a kid, we would send the coaching staff in there. There's $4,500 straight off the bat, and we were doing 5 schools a week. So there's 20 grand a week that was going to a private academy, as opposed to the FFA going in. Now it's $3. It could have been $2 if the school negotiated with us. We'd go in and it was $2 a child to participate for an hour in a football program, which is a cup of coffee for a parent. You put that over a 10-week program, it was $20 for 10 weeks for the parent to know that there was a company coming in and running the kids ragged for an hour, and they were getting the most amount of exercises while the teacher was sat at the side marking their books. So
Sorry,
if
Mark.
you start thinking outside the box, there's loads of ways, Simon, that the FFA could generate money.
But the thing is, FFA don't necessarily have to. The clubs could generate the money and be sustainable. So why does it doesn't all have to flow
between the clubs and the FFA? That's the biggest problem, mate.
So in Wales, as an example, back in the 90s, we had a program which, you know, I when I started back in the FA, I was what was known as the area coach. And so I used to go into the schools and coach primary school. I then had centres of development that I would, and fund centres the kids would go to. Out of that program, I generated enough money to have 5 full-time employees working for the FAW in my region. Now, if you took the same model, you could determine that a club could be a development officer. So yeah, A-League clubs could do the same. Go into primary schools, run fund centres after school, etc., etc. They could all have a license fee that filters back into the centre and helps furnish the game. We could do so much more if we did it collectively instead of competed.
So in your experience, Rob, the A-League clubs, I presume the MPL clubs as well, they don't do that at the moment?
The A-League clubs go into primary schools, and obviously some of them have community programs. But we could set a national direction. So instead of having 50 versions of something, have 1 or 2 versions of something. So, you know, a primary school program is currently being developed around physical literacy. And that's going to be rolled out in the coming year. And that's obviously government of high behind that. We did that in Wales in the early 2000s, and it was recognised as the best schools program in football in the UK, because our retention rate was phenomenal in terms of schools signing up for it all the time. Out of that, then you could have a national social program written. And this is what I proposed in the strategies. Have a national social program. So you have after schools clubs, holiday camps, all meeting standards. Any club who meets the standards can run them, or anyone actually who reach the standards could run them. And they pay a license fee. And that comes back to the middle and helps fund other things. There's a business in just kicking a ball round, but our guys at the top don't recognize that. The only business they see is TV money or sponsorship. There's 1.5 million people who pay to play football.
Does James Johnson see it, Rob?
I don't know. In all honesty, I'm not sure. You know, I haven't had a deep enough conversation with James, you know, over the recent weeks, and obviously he's been tied down with other issues. But you know, there's a way of thinking in the building, and I think it's the same in the federations, that money is external to the game. But if you build the strategy, the game will fund itself largely, because people will pay for activity, whether it's in school, after school clubs, whatever it is. You know, a lot of parents, both of them work. If you can occupy the player for a kid for an hour after school, running round, and it happens to be with a ball, why wouldn't you?
Well, Rob, maybe somebody in football media will pick up on your strategy if there's any of us left by the time this is this is over, because there's not many of us left. Let me tell you.
Alan, Glenn.
All right, you spot the right club, mate. You're good.
Alan and Glenn, is there anything you guys want to add to this? I've got a couple more questions, but I know you two have expressed a desire to make a comment on this.
Yeah, well, I was just going to touch on, sorry, Glenn. I was just going to touch on Simon's question and the TV revenue. I've worked at FFA in different guises probably since 2005 with youth national teams and different national teams. And when I started in 2005, the revenue and the turnover of FFA was about 30 million from all the different sources. And we were always complaining we didn't have enough money for young Socceroos, for Joeys, young Matildas, camps and get-togethers, and probably had less than what we had in the 90s when even Muskie was playing, when they used to go to South America and Holland, and we competed so well during that decade and prior, when the turnover was maybe $1 million or $2 million. The turnover of FFA is now over 100 million, and we still have the same problem. The decision is where has that extra revenue gone when we get it? It doesn't go back into those national youth teams, for example. That's one place it doesn't go, because they've still got the same level of resourcing that we had before. We have to travel to Asia, and that's an extra cost, but still the overall budget of every national youth team and the amount we spend on them is less than what it was 10 years ago, and certainly less than what it was 20 years ago in comparison to the total revenue of the organisation. So it's more of a comment than a question.
Glenn?
Yeah, you there?
Yeah.
Yep. So I've worked in I've worked in all the football codes during my career, and what we're doing in Australia at the moment is there's obviously a competition for young sporting talent. The FFA and the other sports often brag about who's got the highest participation rates at a junior level, and you're obviously then looking to get the young male and female youth into your sport. If you look at rugby league, there's an obvious pathway to play professionally in rugby league, and then play for the Kangaroos, and all the clubs around the country aspire to have their young players in their club to be an Australian representative. If you look at cricket, there's an obvious pathway to become an Australian cricket player. Rugby union, it's mainly a private school game, but the pathway is obvious. AFL is very much a socialist system, but I worked in the AFL in the early 80s when it became a commission that started running the game around Australia in 1985. And it being a socialist system, there's, once again, all the clubs aspire to have their young players in their club to get drafted at the AFL level. As everyone's pointed out tonight, what appears to happen in football is that everybody operates in silos around the country, and I've worked with Stadge for a number of years there in the FFA, and as Rob also pointed out, up until this stage, the FFA operated in silos as well. So, most people wouldn't see me as a football person, but as an outsider who's worked in sport for a long period of time, I struggle with the football system where everybody is not working together to develop the best possible players they can to represent our country. If you look at all the codes, obviously football is a sport where young players can go overseas. The only other sport where they can do that at a young age is probably basketball. But even basketball now are really getting their act together and working with the other basketball associations, in particular the way they're now tapping into the American professional, the NBA, and working very closely with them in regards to talent pathways. So just on that point alone, football's got to get its act together so that there is an obvious pathway into the A-League and W-League for young players, where young players are aspiring to play that and get their football experience in Australia before they go overseas. And also, I believe, where A-League and W-League clubs are getting the recognition for their academies. So young players are aspiring to play in those academies rather than, as you know, some of the people online tonight have pointed out, crossing over the road and paying unnecessarily large amounts of money to be in private academies. I know it's been pointed out that, you know, that might be where the best coaches are, as former players, but we've got to get the best coaches into the NPL clubs, and we've got to get the best coaches into the A-League and W clubs, so young people will aspire to be there. So there is a pathway to the Socceroos and the Matildas.
Can I just pick up on a couple of points there, because I agree totally with Glenn, is that the thing with the pathway as well, I think it's a couple of comments read there, is that the first thing in the pathway is people need to love the game. So when someone comes into the game, intrinsic motivation is the biggest factor, and the environment's got to be one where they're having fun, plenty of ball contact, enjoying it, and they actually want to stay. And if they so in the terms of professional football, of the 350 million players of the world, 60,000 earn a full-time living. There's 0.02%. So the majority, you know, by masses, are just going to play for fun all their life. And therefore, that's the most important thing. Because if you get that right at the bottom, those who are motivated and will want to practice and will aspire, and as long as they've got the environments to go into. So not everyone needs to be coaching or be coached from day one. It's a case of getting those intrinsic motivations right, and young people getting the right experience. And a whole strategy could actually hold a football strategy that looks at all components from grassroots to elite can fix it. But that discussion's got to be had. You can't just pick pieces out of it.
I totally agree, Rob. It's so much a silo system, and there is. I just don't understand. I mean, there's a lot of people on the call here who would understand it a lot better than I. But there's just no connection between the NPL clubs and the A-League clubs and W-League clubs in regards to providing an obvious pathway for young players to do that. There just seems to be such distrust between the organisations, and I know it's historical, but at some stage we have to break that down where NPL clubs and A-League clubs and W-League clubs are working together.
So I have a few more questions here, and I've got one question from a gentleman called John Pladis. Now, John is someone who is actually now based in the UK, but was in Australia. He's got a question about pathways. I'm then going to fire to Pat Hedges after John, then Mark McCormick, and then we're going to end on a point with Gary Cole, because I'm cognizant of time. I think we could talk all day, but what I want to do is I want to get John on this point, because you've got a specific point you want to make, John, about pathways.
Yeah, how are you, Rob? How are you guys? Just with pathway for Australian players, obviously it's not happening at the moment. You know, you look at the last World Cup squad, the under-16s, you had a massive percentage of the players that are playing the game abroad, as opposed to playing the game in Australia. I think to be recognised on the world stage and actually have that development from young, the restructure needs to completely change. It's day and night between Australia and the rest of the world. The development, I've been involved with the SAP in Australia and the youth, and I spent my last year in Sydney as a technical director, and I just trying to educate the coaches on basic principles that are taught abroad, well, in the UK here or Europe. They just didn't want to know, and they all got their C licenses and going for their B licenses, and it just doesn't make any sense how we're going backwards when we're offering all these things. And you know, what can be done to improve this, and where does it start? Does it start from the FFA in, you know, or Football New South Wales or Football Victoria? How can we change this? Because we want to see a generation, you know, like the golden generation that Cozzy's just mentioned, in a message where we want these players to come through. We wanted to get them on the national stage where, hey, we are a force to reckon with. Australian players are a force to reckon with. What can be done? How do we change it?
Well, first, yeah, sorry, John. I would say the first thing is, you know, if people have got C licenses, that ain't an academy. Sorry.
I'm not talking about academy. I'm talking about your NPL clubs, for example, in Sydney. Yeah. Obviously, everyone has to have a C license, but they just don't have the skills. They don't have the right teaching methodology. They don't have the right teaching tools to actually develop the players and actually give them a pathway. Players need to leave. They need to go abroad.
Well, I don't agree. The players need to go to the best environments. That's your problem, is that people don't encourage that. There's so much. The clubs are so possessive of their players. It's phenomenal.
But how do we change that? How can that be changed in Australia?
Because I think if you had a genuine system that recognised excellence from ordinary, then it would be a no-brainer. But at the moment, everyone can say they're doing great stuff because there's no accountability. None.
Correct.
Rob, am I off mute?
Yeah.
So if you recognise excellence from ordinary, does that mean we go back to a centralised coaching system for the best players in the country like the AIS? Because I think since we got rid of that, we've gone backwards big time.
I wouldn't do that personally, John. I think if you currently look at the AIS, which is one age group, I can tell you that there's probably 3 or 4 environments, or 3 environments, I think, that are at a really high standard in this country. Therefore, they're 21 times the AIS because there's 7 age groups. And those boys are in an environment where they're getting 5+1 or, you know, 6 or 4+1. Now, the other thing is, the AIS was at a time when no one else was doing it. You were way ahead of the curve.
My question I'd put up before.
Yeah, you were way ahead of the curve. And then instead of actually expanding that program, the rest of the world looked at Australia and went, oh, we can do that. Lilleshall lasted 2 years, I think, before it went handed over to the clubs. And 93, Howard introduced the academy system. And then they win 2 World Cups 20 years later. And the players are coming through. So it took 20 years for that system to boot in. So the thing is, we're talking about something that needs to be implemented now that you won't see the benefit of in terms of 10 or 12 years. You won't see it.
And the way that the AIS worked back then was it was essentially initially the under-20 side, the national team. And then it dropped an age group, went to the Joeys. But I agree, you could have the club academies, there's no problem with that. But if you took the best of those best kids, you took one kid out of each academy and put them and really trained them up and put them in it was virtually one of your youth national teams in the AIS. They were there 7 days a week. Would that
and what, you're moving them back overseas, or what happens after?
Well, if they're coming through, you take the Joeys, for example, they'd be maybe moving overseas. Because that's where all those guys got success from, because they'd come through that academy and they were...
But the average age was 22 before they went overseas.
Yeah, they played, well, a lot of them, like Dukes went to the NSL, Muskie went to the NSL,
yeah.
Emo went to the NSL.
So why not just bring them through the clubs?
Yeah, I agree.
The problem is the clubs aren't letting the youngsters come through. I know of a few clubs that are actually allowing like a 17-year-old to play in FFA Cup games, or, you know, sit on the bench for the first team during a league fixture in Australia. The problem is they're not being given that opportunity as much as what they're being given that opportunity abroad, where there are so many different tiers.
So the solution there is to design the competition structure so the opportunity's there. So you could have your reserve teams playing in the second tier. But at
Yeah,
the minute,
that would work a lot better.
Yeah.
That would work a
That's
lot
where your
better.
state federations dive in though and stop all that.
But they do, and this is it. So you know, the
They get rid of
Victory
them.
and City are in Div 3 of the MPL instead of being ring fenced in Div 1. Then you would see a difference. So it's, you know, and does it? They say it devalues the integrity of the competition. Does it? In my day at Cardiff City, we played in the Welsh League in reserves. I can tell you that, and a lot of the clubs you played against, they supported Cardiff City. You know, on a Saturday, they'd be down at Ninian Park. They wanted to kick 7 lumps out of you because you wore the shirt when you played them. It was a great education.
Yep, I agree.
And therefore, it's about the technicians. This is the irony is, I've had this discussion with MPL technicians, and they agree. They got no issue. It's the egos above it are the problem.
Look, just another thing. I'm from that era with Mark Robertson, where you know, he had the academy, Mr. Soccer. We were playing in the same leagues alongside another academy, and that generation of players, the 01s, 02s, 03 born players. I know so many players that have taken their football career abroad because there was just no pathway for them in Australia. And unfortunately, they're not even being given a chance. And there was kids that I know of being, you know, political or whatever the situation is, where, you know, I mean, I know we all know there's an aspect that clubs are taking money under the table to fund themselves for whatever purpose, but there's a lot of kids that are falling through the cracks in the system, in the current FFA system, that are missing out and not being given a chance to develop in Australia, having to go abroad. You know, just more of a comment.
I mean, is there a system? I don't think there's a system, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
That's my honest appraisal. There isn't a system. We call MPL elite development. No, it isn't. Some very good examples or some decent examples, but by and large, no, it's not. And, you know, there isn't a system. There's not a competition system and there's not an academy system. You fix those two, you can fix the game. That doesn't mean kids won't go abroad. It doesn't mean that. Some will chance it, but it would mean there'd be a much better opportunity for them.
Conscious of time, guys, I know we could probably talk on this subject for a considerable time more, but I want to bring Pat Hedges into the conversation. Pat, you have a question on coach education, which, given Rob and Glenn are on the call together with Gary Cole, I think might be quite an interesting point to make. So, Pat, on you go, mate.
Hiya, Rob.
Hi, mate.
Do you think Coach Ed should be independent from the member federations who use it as a cash cow, with hardly any money, in my experience, going back into coach or player development? I'll give you, over the last 2 years, I've brought in $300,000 into Coach Ed, of which 140,000 went to Football Queensland after expenses. And I know for a fact that none of that money came back into my department.
Yeah, I mean, basically, when you say independent, I think that it should be, well, I proposed something in probably about 2013, I think, which was at that stage, I think the Coach Ed budget, you know, cost of the Coach Ed budget centrally was, you know, $500,000, in which we had to recover that money first, if you like.
Yeah.
Because there was myself, Kelly, a couple of employees, whatever the case was. And then my proposal was that the rest would be retained by the federations on the premise that it funded a coach developer, someone who actually can deliver, not an administrator, a coach developer, and that all the money was reinvested back into coach development. It got turned down by FFA. I firmly believe that if you had, again, centralized system where you had control over that and you reinvested the money back into the region and possibly put a levy on, because we know in certain areas of the country there's not enough critical mass, and you could support Northern Territory or more remote areas. You could actually do a lot more in the coach development space And if you worked, you know, and I know this is happening, but work closely with the FCA, you could get a huge amount out of what comes in going back to the coaching community.
No, I'm with you on that. I think I saw $1,000 for a camera in 2 years. So, yeah.
I'll just touch on that, James, if I can.
Yeah, please, Glenn. Please.
So just before Rob left our shores, he was involved in a meeting with Sean Douglas and myself, and from that we have formed a joint working group to so with FCA, FFA and the member federations. We've now got a working group meeting on a weekly basis to look at the revalidation professional development model for advanced licensed coaches, and it's led to in the short term the workshops that we're running on Tuesday and Thursday nights, which are being driven by FCA and supported by FFA and the member federations. You know, as Gary would know, we're spending a lot of time behind the scenes, which hasn't been made public yet, endeavouring to break down a lot of silos that do exist. We had James Johnson present to the A-League coaches for 2 hours the other night in a very open and transparent football discussion, where he's wanting to have coaches be a lot more proactive in contributing to the intellect and expertise in the development of football programs around the country, which was really encouraging. FCA is also about to submit a proposal on the request of the federations and the FFA in regards to coach education, which we're about to do. And it goes along the lines of what Rob is talking about. I mean, our association, whilst in its infancy, is an association by constitution where all the money that we raised goes back into coaches. So where it doesn't necessarily go at the moment, it goes back into consolidated funds, as Pat brought up before, and also at an FFA level. So I believe the FFA are in a position where they're open to sitting down and talking to FCA about a different model in regards to how coach education is done moving forward. I just also want to touch on a point that was raised before about the AFC licences and how they're recognised over in UEFA, and I congratulate Muskie on recently achieving his UEFA recognition of competency. But the UEFA now do have a recognition of competency procedure so that Australian coaches can gain recognition at a UEFA level. It is different in different countries, but Sean Douglas tabled that procedure at the A-League coaches meeting the other day, which is highly relevant to a lot of the A-League coaches and the national team coaches. And it would be well worth, which we're going to try and do, get Muskie back on board to assist in that discussion with coaches on one of these forums.
Thanks, Glenn. Mark, you've got a question which I think leads quite well into the statement that Gary Cole wants to make. So, Mark.
Yep. Rob, you felt you could make a change coming into the job. What was the best case scenario that you thought of? And now, having had the experience that you've had, what's realistic and how big is the gap between those two?
Well, I thought that with the unbundling of the league, we could, obviously cement professional football and make sure that remains the figurehead of the game, if you like. I also was trying to build a robust international department so that at the minute, international football's cyclical. So if the teams qualify, they get more. If they don't, it's stopped, which is ridiculous. Therefore, certain age groups miss out. If you're born in the wrong year, if you're 16 when the 17s are running, you're buggered. You appear at 20 if you're lucky. That was the other thing. And then obviously there was the academy rollout. Now the academy rollout is, particularly relevant and can happen. And it actually could have happened in the close down. It could have been, a lot of the auditing could have been done around the A-League, no sweat. Equally so, I think that the second tier discussion, that that could be cut frugally, and might be a version of either two confederations or two conferences, or potentially, you know, just the 5 states, but you raise the bar and you go back to maybe only 8 clubs in the state meet the standard. And there's your second tier, and it could be the expansion model, might take 5 years. There's loads of modeling that could be done and could be done with regardless of the finances. Just by actually setting out the strategy, setting out some discussion points and seeing who's up for it. You know, the reality is that in my opinion, people don't even think in that space. It all starts with the business and not the football.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Not sure that answered what you wanted, Mark, but that's sort of where I still think those things can happen. International will be more difficult because there's a financial implication. Academies is a no-brainer, and actually revising the competition structure, having one group dealing with the whole competition structure, not an MPL group, not a second tier group, not a new leagues working group, but a one group looking at competitions across the country and determining that. You could do that tomorrow.
Yep.
Gary, you've got a question, mate, or a statement that you'd like to say. Think to the whole crowd.
I'm not sure if there's a question in there somewhere, but I want to thank Rob for his time tonight. And I also want to thank him because when he left his position, he put out the paper Out of Crisis that not only identified the challenges that we've got, in his opinion, but a raft of different solutions as well. And that's actually a little bit rare because our game's a game of opinions, and we like to. There's plenty of people that love to chuck hand grenades, and it's easy to identify where the problems are. The challenge for us all is how do we make this work? Simon's question about the loss of the revenue from Hyundai and you know, Foxtel walked away. For me, the big challenge here is the game doesn't know what success looks like. We've got the FFA and we've got the member feds, and I worked for FFV for a year and had these sorts of conversations all the time. You know, we need to fix this. You get a group of MPL clubs in the room, or you get MPL clubs, referees, coaches in the room, and the hats of bias go on straight away, and everyone's looking to protect their patch. So for me, the way forward is clear. At some point, we've got to sit down and come up with what Stephen Covey calls the, you know, what's the end point here? Where are we going? What does success look like? Because for an MPL club, success looks like something for them. For a community club, it looks like something for them. For Football Coaches Australia, hey, shit, surprise, surprise, we've got a bias as well. But at some point, if we're going to go forward, we've got to come up with what success looks like for all of us. I think we need one strategic plan. I think there's got to be, whether it's a member fed or state offices out there to roll that stuff out. And then I think we can, instead of putting the business case of how much that costs first, we put it afterwards. We look at what we need to do, and then we work out. And the thing that's intriguing is on this call tonight, there's a whole bunch of coaches, and they keep coming up with solutions. Mark's found a solution to make money because he couldn't get in to a club to coach, so he's generated a 4 times income for himself and 6 other people in coaching. You know what? Our game's full of bloody really smart people, a shitload of business people, and if we come together, I think the game will work out how to fund itself. I don't think the size of the game that will be a problem. If we know the story that we can talk about from the rooftops, and if we're all talking the same story, then maybe we can take the game forward together, and that would be a bloody a godsend from my perspective. Sorry, I've been preaching.
Yeah.
Gary, can I just say something on that? I just did a comment from Rocky down there. Germany held a national convention. So I proposed a summit in September, and it was proposed to happen before lockdown happened. Actually, it was cancelled. The irony is there was very little technical representation on it.
Yeah. And look, to be fair, Rob, we've had that conversation with Chris Nico, with James Johnson as well, and Greg O'Rourke, and just said, look, why do you keep telling coaches what to do? Why the friggin' hell don't you sit down with us and ask our opinion? Because there's an awful lot of people. By nature, coaches are innovative. They have to, if you're losing 2-0 at half time, you have to find a solution or a prayer or a new job.
And the thing is, there'll be a variety of opinions, but on the big issues, most people will be aligned.
Absolutely.
Because most of the coaches don't necessarily put their hat on. Because you move around a fair bit. You're not in one place all your career. The issue is that, you know, there's a lot of bias out there and a lot of self-interest, and that's the challenge.
Absolutely.
John, that statement at the end, honestly, that final statement you've made, I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, need to change the game, change the culture, change the people. I think, you know, sitting back and listening to what's going on, it's obvious, and Gavin Ray's made this point, you know, we need to have unity across football in Australia, but the challenge is how we're going to do that.
Yeah.
I think that's the main challenge. And in situations like this, you know, the reason that the Football Business Network was set up, and it was, you know, we were fortunate enough to partner with the FCA, was to have people like this crowd on forums and have networking events and talk about business and talk about football and how, you know, we could generate funds to grow the game and what we could do to make the game as well. So, you know, it's great that we're doing something like this, because I think this is what the game needs. But we have run over what we had originally planned to do with Rob. So I'm going to bring this call to a close this evening. Rob, thank you so much on behalf of myself and on behalf of the Football Business Network. Glenn, do you have any comments you wish to say on behalf of FCA?
No, just to thank Rob for his time and wish him all the best for the future. And as you've already said and others have said, it's great to just have people on talking football. And the more we can do it, the better. And the FFA is obviously setting up you know, the starting 11 and other groups and starting to listen to other groups. And that's what James indicated to the coaches the other night. So hopefully that'll continue.
So we're holding these calls on a weekly basis. Next week's call, same time, is going to be with Simon Hill, who we're going to be firing questions to him. I promise, Simon, we'll go easy on you, ish. We'll see how we go. I promise we won't ask anything about Fox Sports. Okay. But look, guys, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. I'm honoured to have people on the call like, you know, John Kuzmina, Kevin Muscat, Alan Stajic. You know, it's phenomenal to see you guys. Thank you so much indeed for joining. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Robbo, enjoy your Friday morning over in the UK. Enjoying you too. And we will see you again, hopefully, next week. Thanks very much indeed for joining, guys. We'll see you again.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you. See you guys. See you
Cheers,
guys.
Rob.
Rob, and
Take care.
Rob, you stay on?
See you, John. See you, boys.